And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Tigers!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers. Yeah.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
With a rare disease, a rare type of cancer, and I want to pray specifically for her and all of you that are listening. If you can, keep her in your thoughts and prayers. She's a young girl that I think she's only 5 or 6 years old, and just got diagnosed with a rare type of lymphoma. And I want to pray specifically for her because that's a lot bigger than football, and this is my podcast, and that's what I want to do. And anyway, Lord, just thank you for everything you continue to bless us with. And just please be with this little girl, Lord. And you know her name, you know her needs, and her family who are close to me. And I just please just put your hand on her, Lord, and her family. Give them comfort, strength, and understanding. And if it be in your will, just completely heal her, Lord. And as things like this that are a lot bigger than the football and the hobbies and the extra activities that we do to fellowship in your name, Lord, these things are bigger than us, but not bigger than you, Lord. And just thank you for everything you continue to bless us with. Please be with this family and this little girl as they're about to begin treatment and tests and a barrage of things that it's going to be confusing, but just please keep her calm and help her understand what's going on, Lord. And give her family strength and comfort and faith in you, Lord. And in your name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. Jumping right on in. This is our waiver wire pod. Obviously, if you've been listening long enough, but I'm going to go over it anyway because we're just at week 5 and I'm about to stop talking about the premise of this pod. But anyway, it's our top waiver wire additions that we think that are owned in less than 60% of leagues. They're typically our top 2 or 3, maybe 4 at each position. Just depends on week to week how many that we think are, if it's deeper or shallower, I might give more options. It really just depends on what I think stand out. But first off, we're going to thank our sponsors, Big Reed BBQ, Automotive Detailing Solutions, This Little Piggy Barbecue Food Truck, Mimi's Children's Boutique, and Doug Demona Farm and Feed, which is our new sponsor. But our title sponsor for this episode is This Little Piggy Barbecue Food Truck. It's a barbecue food truck based in Jonesboro, Louisiana, that brings the best barbecue around to the people. You can find This Little Piggy and owner Kyle Terrell set up at events and festivals all around Jackson Parish and surrounding areas to keep track of when you can get your hands on some amazing brisket or pulled pork. Follow This Little Piggy on Facebook. And guys, these are people, these sponsors are people that support us, and we really appreciate them supporting us and kind of helping us get started, as we are only in a couple years of this podcast. But we really appreciate everybody that does sponsor and give us support, and we'd appreciate if our listeners would support them. Next, obviously, as we do every week, we got our waiver pod now. I'll cover a little bit of news and injury updates, and then our waiver wire additions. And then later on in the week, we'll have our start sit sleeper graphic come up on Facebook. And then we'll also have our start sit sleeper pod at the end of the week, mixing in some news and injuries along the way with that. Jumping right on in, some big time injuries. T. Higgins has a rib fracture, no timetable to return, and no timetable really given. They said he could not miss any time, which I highly doubt, but Higgins states that he doesn't think it will be an extended thing, and he did not rule himself out this weekend. I think he misses at least a week. A broken rib is extremely painful. We don't know specifically which rib or where it is at. They did not list that, but if it's in a dangerous location or a dangerous fracture that could if he takes a hit, it could puncture his lung, or even worse, puncture a more vital artery or organ. That's something they're not going to take a chance on. I just don't see him not missing any time, because they're going to want to give this some time to heal before he gets back out there. Next is going to be, and obviously with T. Higgins, if he's out, that gives a big boost to Tyler Boyd. in that offense, and maybe even Irv Smith at the tight end. Next, Kyron Williams, running back for the Rams, he was out, in and out, and emerged with a hip injury. They're just calling it a bruised hip after the overtime win for the Rams last week. It didn't seem to hold him out of the game. This could just be a practice designation where he's kind of sore and might just end up missing a little bit of practice. I would keep an eye on it just to see throughout the week. That's all we got so far. Next, we got Jonathan Taylor with his quote-unquote ankle injury. Kind of craziness right now because the coach come out and said that he is going to be at practice tomorrow and is happy to be back at practice with his teammates. Now, that just does not sound like what we were hearing from Jonathan Taylor prior to all this. So, but if he does come back to practice on Wednesday, that's going to start his 21-day window where he can be activated from the PUP, but does not have to return to the active roster for 21 days. After 21 days, he has to be put on the active roster or some kind of injury. There's something has to happen there. And he stated today, about 5 or 6 hours before this pod, that he still doesn't want to play for the Colts, and he doesn't want to, and they still don't want to give him a long-term contract per ESPN. And ESPN says, and they stated on their website, that just because he's practicing doesn't mean he won't hold out eventually, and it doesn't mean that he's going to play. I mean, this is crazy, which we knew it was going to be a crazy situation. But currently, who knows what's going to happen. I would not hold my breath for him to play for the Colts, and if he does, what kind of workload he will have, because if he gets injured, it's not going to be good for him or the organization, because they're not going to be able to get a trade they want, and he's not going to get the money he wants. So it does not benefit anybody for him to play right now, really, honestly. And there was rumors that he was plenty healthy enough week 1 to play without them putting him on the PUP list, and they put him on the PUP list because they're trying to extend this situation out. So I wouldn't hold my breath. We'll update you again on that on later on this week when we do our Start Sit Sleeper pod. Next is going to be Javonte Williams. Ended up getting ruled out early in this past weekend's game with a hip flexor injury. Was reported that it wasn't very serious, and he might not even miss any time. I mean, with his history last year, missing the whole season, they got Samaje Perine and then Jaleel McLaughlin, who seemed to kind of emerge in a role that we'll talk about here in a little bit. I think they're going to err on the side of caution with him. I don't know. But, I mean, I really think it would be rare if he didn't miss at least a week with a hip flexor injury like this. So we'll just see. Keep an eye on his practice participation as the week goes. And then last but certainly not least, Pat Freiermuth. I mean, as if the tight end position wasn't barren enough, or at least hard enough to predict. Goes down with a hamstring injury this past week. He's expected to miss at least 2 to 3 weeks is what it was expected, what it was projected initially. He has not been ruled out for next weekend yet, which is kind of strange, but Mike Tomlin did list him as very doubtful, quote unquote, very doubtful, which if that's coming from Mike Tomlin, who's typically normally a little bit more optimistic about injuries, then it's probably not going to play this week. And I would keep an eye to see if they even think about putting him on injury reserve, which would rule him out for a minimum of 4 weeks. But that's prior move. There was a couple more injuries. If there's a player that got injured and they're going on a bye, I'm not talking about him in this segment. I probably won't talk about him on Start Sit Sleeper. We will wait until next week after this weekend's games, because we've got enough to talk about as it is. Obviously, if it's a season-ending injury, we will talk about it. But other than that, if you've got a guy that's going on a bye and he's injured, you want to know what's going on, I'll talk about him next week. You're not going to hear about him this week, just, because they're not going to have practice schedules. They might not even have an update till next week. So that's just kind of right there where we're at with guys that are going to be on a bye this weekend and might have an injury designation after this past week. So we're going to go ahead and jump right on into our waiver wire targets, and we're going to start, as we always do, with quarterback. And number 1 has got to be C.J. Stroud. He's been on this list, I think, for 3 weeks in a row now, maybe 4. No, I'm pretty sure just 3 weeks in a row now. Quarterback for Houston, he's only owned in about 32% of leagues right now. This weekend, he's going up against Atlanta. He's currently the number 7 quarterback in fantasy through 4 weeks, and that really is all you should need to know. Through 4 weeks, he's the number 7 quarterback, and he's only owned in 32% of leagues. If he's out there, go scoop him up, because at least at the worst you could do is have him for a bye week replacement, if not an injury replacement. But this week he's at Atlanta, who is the 18th worst defense against a quarterback, and they've given up 26 points to Jordan Love and Jared Goff in the last couple weeks. So I'll take my chances with Stroud this week at Atlanta in the Dome, so you don't have to worry about weather. Stroud plays in the Dome also in Houston, so it's going to be familiar for him to play in that kind of terrain on the turf. So I like CJ Stroud a lot, not to mention all the playmakers he has around him, especially Nico Collins emerging into a top-end wide receiver that he is. I like CJ Stroud a lot. Second on the list for me is going to be Josh Dobbs from Arizona. He's owned in only 2% of leagues, and I know you're probably thinking, Josh Dobbs from Arizona? Really? Really. I don't know what else to say. This week he's going up against Cincinnati, but was thrown into a bad situation in Arizona 3 days before the season started. Didn't know the offense, nothing from Jack, and he seized the opportunity, and here he is showing what he can do against some tough defenses. Over the last 3 weeks, he's averaged 24.3 fantasy points a game, and 2 of those weeks were against the top 2 defenses in fantasy and in the league, and that would be San Francisco and Dallas. And he come out with an average of 24.3 points against those 2 defenses of those 3 games against 2 of those defenses. I don't know what else. I don't know what to say. It's really impressive what he's doing. Is it going to last? Who knows? But the fact that he's doing it right now, he's running a little bit, he's passing a little bit. They're not exactly winning games, but they're not just laying down like we kind of thought they would. So they're making it interesting, and he's putting up fantasy points, and that's all you can ask for. Other than week 1 flop, which was probably a fluke because he just got there and didn't know nothing about the offense, or he didn't know anything. Sorry about my English. Didn't know anything about the offense, honestly. And now he's going up against Cincinnati, who's the 16th ranked defense against quarterbacks, who are giving up an average of 24 points in the first 2 weeks to quarterbacks that were like Dobbs in Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson. So because they both kind of use their legs a little bit and throw the ball fairly well, they're pretty athletic quarterbacks and don't have extremely talented wide receiver cores. And I would dare to say that they're at least similar in talent. So as far as the wide receiver core. So, I like Josh Dobbs a lot this week in Cincinnati. I got Russell Wilson in a lot of leagues, and he's going to, he's kind of got a tough matchup this week. So I'm thinking about starting Josh Dobbs in one league. I've got Justin Herbert that's on a bye, and Josh Dobbs out there. And also, I'm probably going to pick up Josh Dobbs and start him because CJ Stroud's owned in a lot of the leagues that I'm in. But Josh Dobbs my number 2, and then last but certainly not least, Jared Goff. Owned in 57% leagues. This week he's going up against Carolina at home. He was not as explosive as we'd hoped against Green Bay last week, but he's still ranked as the quarterback 11. And with bye weeks coming around and, next week you could do a lot worse than Jared Goff as a fill-in. So he's 3rd on this list just because he's going up against Carolina, who has the 4th ranked defense against quarterbacks, which is kind of crazy because they're pretty banged up in their secondary, and it's not an extremely impressive secondary, but for some reason, their 4th ranked defense against quarterbacks, and they've only allowed and they haven't given up more than 17 points to a quarterback this year yet, and then that was Geno Smith. So I would like to have Stroud or Dobbs over Goff this week, but in the future going forward, I still like Goff more. Maybe not more than Stroud, but definitely more than Dobbs. But still, last week, Carolina's defense held Kirk Cousins to 13 points, but he also only threw the ball 19 times for some reason. I don't know why. But so I consider that kind of a fluke. So I think Carolina's defense is probably more vulnerable than we think. Pick him up, stash him if you need to, but if you need to start him this week, I think you could do worse than starting Jared Goff if you need to this week. And that's going to pretty much round out our quarterbacks. There's a couple other quarterbacks that could have been on this list, but these are the three that I like the best currently. Next is going to be running back, and honestly, this is really tough this week at waiver wire because there's not a lot of really good options. Nobody really stood out. There weren't any really big injuries at the running back position other than Javonte Williams, which I'm going to talk about his replacement in a minute. But I mean, honestly, two of these guys are guys that I talked about stashing earlier on a couple pods ago, and they're on this list now because the guys that I've been talking about, they're owned in more than the certain percentage of leagues that are required, or they're just not really panning out still. Doesn't mean they can't be I guess useful, but these three guys right here I think could be useful this week. Number one is going to be Jaylen Warren for Pittsburgh for me. He's owned in 59.8% of leagues, barely squeaked under the 60% mark, but he's going up at home against Baltimore. And honestly, his usage rate is like equal to that of Najee Harris. He's being used in 50% of the snap percentage in the offense. He's getting almost all of the passing down work for the running back. He caught 6 passes last week. And he's honestly just looked a lot better than Harris this year. Now, Harris did look a lot better last week, but honestly, I don't think he looked good enough to earn back any of his workload. Warren is a great flex option to fill in during the bye week. He's sitting right around 8 to 10 points or so on average at his floor. And that's with the upside of him falling in the end zone and then ending up with like a 16 to 18 point day or so, give or take, for you. And then that ends up being like a top 24 running back. So if he gets in the end zone just by chance. So I like Jaylen Warren. Number 2 for me is going to be Tajay Spears, who honestly is kind of turning into that Jaylen Warren for the Tennessee Titans. He's not taking over because obviously Derrick Henry's not playing as poorly as Najee Harris is, but Tajay Spears for Tennessee, he's owned it at 20% of leagues now. This week they're going at Indianapolis, but he's averaging around the 54% snap mark. Now, it's kind of crazy because Derrick Henry is averaging around a 59% snap share, which means they're playing in a fair amount of sets together, which is good because that gives Spears the opportunity to get the ball even if Derrick Henry's in the game, which is pretty crazy. So, but yeah, 54% snap count the last couple of weeks is his minimum. And he seems to be the preferred pass catching back in Tennessee, which we know Derrick Henry's never been a big pass catching back, but he does do pretty well catching the ball. But it seems like they like to throw the ball to Tajay Spears more, who's a little bit more of an electric runner, not so much of a big thumper type of running back like Derrick Henry. And he's got a solid yards per carry and yards per catch average behind Derrick Henry. Henry looked more like his old self last week, but this week they got the 18th ranked defense against the running back in Indianapolis, who just gave up 37 points to Kyren Williams for the Los Angeles Rams behind a pretty dreadful Los Angeles Rams offensive line. And now Tajay Spears and Derrick Henry, honestly, they both could have a decent game this weekend. If you're in a kind of deep league or if you're in a bind and you need a flex play, Tajay Spears could be a decent option for you. And then last but certainly not least, after kind of a crazy outbreak, Jaleel McLaughlin for Denver, only owned in 0.7% of leagues, is going up against the New York Jets at home this week. Really, I'm not sure how we got to this point with Samaje Perine on the roster, but after Javonte Williams went down with a hip flexor injury, and like I said, they're not expecting to miss much time, but I do think there's a good chance he misses this week. McLaughlin seemed to be the one that was the more productive back and had more opportunity in the game last week. And now we're still not real sure if that's going to be the case or not coming out of this week if Williams does miss, because maybe it was because McLaughlin was practicing for the Javonte Williams role and Perine has his own role in the offense and he had not been practicing in that role like Javonte Williams. So maybe they just threw McLaughlin in there and let Perine keep producing his own role, and maybe they kind of readjust if they find out Williams is not going to be there and Perine has a more complete role this week. I don't know. Honestly, with Sean Payton's history of using 2 running backs and not 1, I would find it doubtful that Perine just takes on a full workload this week. But it could happen. But if Williams does end up missing time and going up against the Jets defense, who's a solid defense, but they're ranked 24th against running backs so far this year, giving up at least 17 points to running backs in every game. At least 17 points in every game all through 4 weeks this year. So running the ball seems to be the Achilles heel of the New York Jets because passing it is definitely not. And but anyway, Jaleel McLaughlin, if Williams is out, could be a nice little streamer at the flex position. I don't know if I'd put him in there at RB2 because if Pirine ends up kind of capitalizing and getting more of the workload than McLaughlin does, but McLaughlin showed the explosiveness and athleticism to be able to get you some points with limited opportunity. So I like it. If Williams is out, he could be somebody you could plug and play in this week. Now for the rest of the season, I don't think so. I don't think he's taking Pirine's role, but for this week, McLaughlin could help you out. And that's going to pretty much wrap up our running back segment. I still like Kareem Hunt, and I think his role will continue to grow. I'm not going to talk about him anymore because he's just not really having the opportunity in production yet. But Jerome Ford's really not doing a lot with his opportunity. He's getting points, but he's not he doesn't have great averages or efficiency. So I think it's only a matter of time till we might start seeing a little bit more Kareem Hunt, but neither here nor there. But that's pretty much it. We're going to roll right on into our wide receivers now. And honestly, this was not the easiest category either this week. A little bit harder than it was for me for last week. But number one on the list has got to be Romeo Doubs from Green Bay. He's only owned in 34% leagues, and this week he's going up against Las Vegas. And honestly, I feel like this is deja vu all over again from last year. I mean, he was on the list multiple times last year with Aaron Rodgers as quarterback, and then eventually just kind of faded as the season went, and Christian Watson just kind of took over. Which made me a lot more hesitant after he had a really big week before last. So I kind of left him off this list, and I was like, let me see you do it again. Well, he did it again. So here he is. But one of the main differences between last year and this year is there's a new quarterback, and that's Jordan Love, who quite possibly could just be locked in and have a really good chemistry with Romeo Doubs because over the last 2 weeks, he's had at least 12 targets and he's played at least 86% of the snap count. So now Christian Watson did just come back from injury this past week, and he only played in 46% of the snaps. But that doesn't mean that when he gets more active in the offense, he's going to take away Romeo Doubs' opportunity or volume. He could end up taking away Jalen Reed's opportunity or volume because he's more of an athletic type wide receiver like Jalen Reed is. And Romeo Doubs' volume could be sustained, and as well as his offense is playing, they can sustain 2 wide receivers, and it very well could be Doubs and Watson. And not to mention this week they got a really friendly matchup against Las Vegas, who's 20th ranked defense against wide receiver, and they've given up at least 30 points and a touchdown to wide receivers in every game so far this year. Every game they've given up at least 30 points combined to wide receivers with a touchdown. And the way Romeo Doubs has been playing the last couple of weeks, I think he has a really good productive week this week against Las Vegas. And he's my number one waiver wire addition at wide receiver. And honestly, he's probably my number 2 overall behind C.J. Stroud. And then going on to the next one is going to be Jameson Williams for Detroit. He's only owned in like 16.3% of fantasy leagues, which is crazy to me because I think he's owned in every one of my fantasy leagues that I'm in, unfortunately. But Jameson Williams, he's going up against Carolina at home this week. But he's coming into a fairly hot offense. And he's really one of the biggest lottery tickets coming off waivers this year. And possibly, possibly a league winner depending on his role in this offense. Now, he is someone that was rated, just wrap your mind around this right now. He was rated better than Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave coming out of their draft whenever, and that's what's crazy to me is those 3 guys were all in the same draft, and there was more guys that have been fairly fantasy relevant, but he was number one rated. He was the number 1 rated wide receiver in that draft class. And Garrett Wilson was 2, or I think Olave was 2, Garrett Wilson was 3, or vice versa. And Jameson Williams was number 1. That's just nuts, okay? And he really hasn't had a chance to live up to the hype yet because of injury and then the suspension, because he was gambling on some other sport, which is completely irrelevant to me. I don't understand why he can't gamble on another sport as long as it's not the NFL, but got suspended for 5 games for it. So now he's coming in healthy. We're going to see if he can live up to the hype. Dan Campbell already said they don't expect to have a heavy workload for him this week, but he is a boom or bust player. I mean, he just takes when his first game last year, I think he had 2 targets and one of them was for 52 yards and a touchdown. And Jared Goff can chunk the ball. So I like a good chance if he's out there 50-60% of plays in this first week. I mean, there's a good chance one of them's a big play. So I like Jameson Williams a lot. I'm not saying to pull him in there, fire him up in your wide receiver 2 spot, but probably wouldn't hurt if you fired him up in the flex. And if you can get him, and honestly, I'm really thinking about trying to trade for him in several leagues to see what happens. And there's a good, decent chance that he ends up being the number 2 pass catcher in this offense behind Amon-Ra eventually once he's fully integrated. So I like Jameson Williams a lot. Number 3 for me is going to be Wan'Dale Robinson for the New York Giants. I know a New York Giants player on the waiver wire episode after that terrible Monday night game. Unfortunately so, but I think for good reason. He's only owned in 1.5% of leagues, and he's at Miami this week. And he's working his way back from an ACL tear last year. And honestly, he looks like the wide receiver and only pass catcher to own in this New York Giants offense, which is crazy. And, I was a big proponent of Darren Waller coming in the season, but honestly, it just looks like Darren Waller doesn't have it. That's all I can say. I don't know. I'm not going to talk about Darren Waller because we're talking about Wan'Dale Robinson, but Darren Waller has really, really disappointed me. I'm kind of glad that I only got him in one of my 4 leagues this year. And honestly, in that league, I don't know how much longer I can hold on to him if he's just not. I mean, they're not even throwing him the ball. He's not even getting targeted. So I don't know what to do about that. But anyway, Wan'Dale Robinson, on the other hand, is getting targeted some. And on Monday Night Football, he only played 64% of the snaps, had 6 targets and 5 catches for 40 yards, and he looked very electric. When he caught the ball, he had some burst. He broke several tackles on one play, and he looked good. And this offense is starving for a playmaker. And Wan'Dale Robinson could be that guy. He was a highly touted prospect coming in when they drafted him, and he just couldn't get past a lot of injuries. He looked healthy the other night. I'd keep an eye on him. And then this week, they're going up against Miami, who doesn't have the best defense, and we know their offense is going to put up some points against the Giants. So there's a good chance that the Giants are going to have to be passing the ball again. And I like Wan'Dale Robinson to at least give you some decent production for you. And then last but certainly not least is Josh Palmer. He's on bye this week, I know, but also Quentin Johnston's kind of in there with him. But Josh Palmer seems like he's the guy to replace Spike Williams right now. Only owned in 46.7% leagues. And I've got him on this list because if somebody drops him because he's going on a bye week to pick up somebody else, pick Josh Palmer up because last week he looks to be the leading the race over Quentin Johnston. He had 8 targets in 86% snap count for the Chargers. He only had 3 catches, but for 77 yards. And honestly, he looked pretty decent. And Herbert's looking at not the efficiency you want to see, but I mean some pretty decent numbers. Now, Johnston could be the guy that could come out of the bye week more after he's been integrated in the offense more and given more time to acclimate. But Palmer is definitely worth owning and hanging out to see if he replaces Mike Williams in this offense because they can only throw the ball so many times to Keenan Allen, and he can only command so much attention, and then somebody else is going to get a lot of open opportunity in this offense. And Josh Palmer could be that guy, and you definitely want to have him and stashed if you do need him because this is an early bye week situation. He could help you out through the byes coming up. Like Josh Palmer a lot. And that's going to pretty much round out our wide receivers. And then last, but it's not last, but certainly the least of my favorite of all these categories is the tight end position, or AKA the craps of fantasy football, where you just roll the dice and cross your fingers. And that's pretty much it. But hey, I did get one right last week, and that was Zach Ertz, because I told you I still like him. He's getting targeted heavily. It was a tough defense, and you know what? He still produced. All right. So he's currently ranked the number 10th tight end so far in fantasy. But last week, 10 targets, 6 catches for 50 yards against San Francisco. If you got a tight end, you come out with 11 points. I mean, you're ecstatic. And that was against San Francisco. and he's the second most targeted tight end in the league, and he's got the fourth most receptions in the league now at the tight end position. And volume is king, right? And he's top 5 in volume, easily top 4. So now he gets Cincinnati at home, who's the 27th ranked defense against tight end, and they're averaging giving up 15 points a week to tight end. And not only that, but they've given up a touchdown in 3 of the 4 weeks that we've been so far. So I'm all in on Zach Ertz, and I'm glad I started him this past week against San Francisco because I really didn't have any other option. And I'll be honest, I think Zach Ertz might be more valuable than Darren Waller right now in fantasy, and I might be picking him up in that league that I haven't. And but I'm here, and Zach Ertz is going to be on this list until he's 60% owned, and he's number 1 for me this week. Number 2 is going to be Jake Ferguson, who I almost put on the list last week, and I didn't because he had a tough matchup, and I should have known better because Dak Prescott likes to throw to his tight end, and I appreciate that. I should have trusted my gut, but I didn't. But Jake Ferguson from Dallas, he's only owned at 24.6% leagues. He's going up against San Francisco this week, which was a tough matchup for Ertz last week. But honestly, they have a very similar skill set, very athletic, big tight ends, and their quarterbacks like to throw the ball to him. So he could end up having a pretty decent week this week. He is 7th in the league in targets and 8th in receptions, but he is 8th in total. He is the 8th fantasy tight end currently through 4 weeks. Now, like I said, tougher matchup, but we just seen him give up 12 points to Zach Ertz in Arizona. And this past week, Jake Ferguson had 7 targets with 7 catches for 70 yards against New England. And he's had at least 7 targets the last 2 weeks. So, if he can do it against New England, I have a firm belief he can do it against Cincinnati. So not Cincinnati, against San Francisco, I apologize. So I like Jake Ferguson a lot, and honestly, I kind of like Jake Ferguson the rest of the season. I think he could be a top 10 fantasy tight end. Number 3 for me is going to be Tyler Conklin. This is somebody purely based off Zach Wilson starting, but he had some fantasy relevance last year when Zach Wilson was the quarterback. He likes to go to Conklin and his tight ends, and honestly, Conklin has averaged 5.75 targets for the last 3 games. And last game against Kansas City, he had 4 catches for 58 yards. And now Uzoma came in on a goal line set and caught the touchdown, but that could have easily been Tyler Conklin from Wilson because he was looking for his tight end in the end zone. So that's a kind of a good sign. And Conklin, who seems to be more involved in the offensive scheme than in Uzoma, I like Conklin a lot better in this offense. Now, this week, they're going up against Denver, who's the 26th ranked defense against tight end, and in Denver. So, and they just gave up 10 catches for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns to Chicago tight ends last week. So, I like Tyler Conklin's chances to have at least a decent week at Denver this week. And then last but not least on this list, which he could have been higher, but he might not play, and that's Luke Musgrave for Green Bay. He's only owned 13.3% of leagues, and he's playing at Las Vegas. The reason he's last is because he got taken out for concussion last week, and which was why he didn't really have a chance to prove if he was going to be worth it or not. But he was removed for concussion, but they have not stated they put him in concussion protocol, which means he has a chance to possibly not be ruled out for this week. And if he does, he's going up against Las Vegas Raiders, who are the 22nd ranked defense against tight ends, and they're giving up at least 12 points a game to tight ends. So he might be worth streaming during bye weeks, or at least this week if you need a tight end. So I like Luke Musgrave, but I am kind of worried just a little bit when Christian Watson come back. Does he take away some of Luke Musgrave's volume? I don't know. But Musgrave is an athletic tight end that has looked fairly decent so far this year in games. So he might be somebody worth picking up, stashing, or just taking a flyer on if he is active this week and not in concussion protocol, because he was practicing today. And that's going to round out our tight ends. And then last, I'm going to leave you with a couple streaming defenses that I like this week. Baltimore's defense at Pittsburgh. Now, Baltimore is owned right at 60% of leagues. I know 60 and under, which kind of, whatever, but 60% of leagues, but they're the number 5 ranked defense so far in fantasy this year. And they're going up against a struggling Pittsburgh offense that has an injured Kenny Pickett with a bone bruise. So there might be a chance their backup starts. And if Kenny Pickett is out there, he's going to be limited on his mobility, which he relies on more than people realize. And honestly, Pittsburgh is already 23rd ranked against defenses, which means they give up an average of at least 12 points a game so far this year to opposing defenses. And Baltimore's been playing really well, so I like Baltimore a lot. They're my number one streamer if you can find them out there. And then my number two is going to be Houston at Atlanta. They're a really sneakily good defense, and they're ranked at number 10 so far in fantasy this year, and they've scored at least 15 points the last 2 weeks. So I'm sorry. They've scored at least 15 points the last 2 weeks. And yeah, that's correct. At least 15 points the last 2 weeks. I'm going to say that again. And they're going up against Atlanta, who is ranked 26th against defenses. And they've given up at least 20 points to defenses the last 2 weeks. So Houston's defense is playing hot. Atlanta's defense is giving up a lot of points to defenses. Atlanta's offense is giving up a lot of points to defenses. And Atlanta's offense is averaging giving up 13.7 points on the year. So I like Houston's defense a lot. It's at Atlanta, though, so it's on their home turf. But Houston's used to playing on the turf because they have a turf home field. And I told y'all before at the beginning of the year, it would not shock me if D'Amico Ryans gets this defense going and is possibly a top 10 defense the rest of the year because he's such a good defensive head coach. But also, you got to factor in Tank Dell is a big contributor on special teams and an electric punt and kick returner. So that also gives you a decent chance for a kick or a punt return for a touchdown with Tank Dell being there. So I like Houston's defense a lot this week going up against Atlanta. And that's pretty much going to round out this episode of our Waiver Wire podcast for week 5. We appreciate everybody that listens. Please like, subscribe, download, give us your feedback, rate us. We appreciate everything. Also, just remember, keep in mind that little girl that has this rare form of lymphoma. Please keep her in your thoughts and prayers because I know her parents and her would greatly appreciate it and her family in general. And I would appreciate it as well because they're close to me. And but we appreciate everybody out there listening. Thank you for everything that you like, subscribe, support our sponsors, and give us a good rating on your podcast app as we appreciate it. And y'all keep chasing that trophy out there. We'll come at you with Start Sit Sleeper Pod at the end of the week. Thank y'all.